Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll do the poem At the Lahore Karhai by Imtiaz Dharkar. Okay, this particular poem by Imtiaz Dharkar, she is a Pakistani writer and portrays the nostalgia that has been experienced by Indians living outside their homeland. So she is a writer of Pakistani origin who migrated to Glasgow with her family in her early childhood. And when we read this poem, we realize that Imtiaz Dharkar cannot be defined within a specific geographical boundary. So as you know, we've been doing module 1. We already learned postcard from Kashmir, and we're talking about diasporic identities. So when we learn this poem also, we understand that this is a diasporic writer who cannot be defined within a particular geographical boundary because she belongs to a multi-local diaspora. So when we look at her particular poem or when we read her poems, we understand that her writings refer to the detachment to her homeland. The poetry, when we read through many of her poems, we understand that her poetry is filled with the themes of dislocation, disruptions caused by this diasporic movements. And Imtiaz Dharkar undergoes a conflict between her homeland and her host land. So her homeland is Pakistan and her host land is the place where she lives now. So she migrated to to Glasgow. From there they moved to Wembley. So she lived in all these particular places in UK. So there is a conflict between the homeland, which is Pakistan, and the host land, the land which hosts her. And this is what creates this inner kind of divisiveness that we see in her poetry. So we see that throughout her writing, she has tried to distance herself from the nationalistic discourse. But we also find that the concept of home always remains as a very emotional space which ties her down. So she is actually in a third space. It's neither the homeland nor the host land. There is a third space. And this third space which she inhabits is a space that is full of tensions, chaos, because she has tenuous relations with the two nations, her homeland and her host land. So she faces a lot of tensions within the third space that she finds herself in or she inhabits. So we find that she indulges in a dialogic relation with the two locations, that she is tormented by the questions of her real identity. So what is her identity? So they are all these diasporic writers or these people who move out of their homeland to another place. They have this problem of identity crisis. So here also we find Imtiaz Dharkar is tormented by the questions of her real identity. So she is happy in her new culture. She adapts to the new culture, but at times, we feel a strong craving for her lost culture and tradition. And her poetry, especially the poems that she writes, describes South Asian migrants' efforts to settle down in the new host land. It is not easy, but they take a lot of effort to settle down in the land which they have moved to. But even when they settle down, the pain of loss of the homeland is seen very deeply, or you can see woven very deeply into the fabric of their writing, and especially her writing. And she is repeatedly trying to recreate her lost land in her writings. So Dharkar's choice to remain as a transnational has forced her to stay away from the longings for her home. But even when she distances herself from the geospace, that does not make her free from any tensions. So she portrays the emotional trauma that permeates her inner self at the thought of her homeland. So the new hybrid identity that has been offered to her by this process of acculturation does not kind of defeat her desire, does not destroy her desire for the past culture and the lost land. There's always this desire for the past culture, for the homeland. She utilizes the images and objects that bring together memories of attachment and the absence of loved people into her poetry. And by that, she tries to bring home the theme of alienation and displacement. So this particular poem, At the Lahore Karhai, would be read as I would say, a representation of the nostalgia of the immigrant for her home. And it is here explored through a particular metaphor, the metaphor of food. So the title itself speaks volumes about the nostalgic longing of the migrant speaker for dishes at home, as the poet brings in a day at the Lahore Kadai. It's a famous Pakistani restaurant in Wembley. Now, this visit to the Lahore Kadai at Great Britain on every Sundays is described as a pilgrimage, which sanctifies her gesture to be in touch with her roots. So the ethnic identity is re-established by referring to her religious identity as well. See, when we read the poem, we see a line, no beer, we are Muslim. So this differentiation of the religious identities based on food and the drink underlines the correlation of food with personal and collective identities. So in this particular poem, we see how the poet narrates old memories coming up from within her heart as she travels down to this place, Lahore Kadai in Wembley. It's not a Pakistani restaurant, it's an Indian restaurant, in the area. And she feels a very powerful nostalgia erupting from within her. So almost the dishes, the kind of food that India and Pakistan, especially North India and Pakistan have, are almost similar, right? So this particular restaurant, Lahore Kadai at Wembley, brings in a powerful nostalgia within her. And she calls it a pilgrimage. And that, for the fact of her calling this journey to Lahore Kadai a pilgrimage, expresses how meaningful this journey went down to be with her, because she compares her journey to that of the truck drivers back in India, driving their trucks on the Grand Trunk Road across Punjab to Amritsar, and then drenched in sweat, swearing, getting down at a dhaba with an expectation to get food that tastes like home. I'll just read the poem for you so you'll understand when I explain all this. It goes like this. It's a great Sunday when we pile into the car, pile is enter, and set off with a purpose, a pilgrimage across the city to Wembley, the Lahore Kadai. Lunch service has begun. No beer, we are Muslim. But the morning sun squeezed into juice and Yad Na Jaye on the 2-in-1. On the Grand Trunk Road, thundering across Punjab to Amritsar, this would be a dhaba. Dhaba is a restaurant, right? Which we see the Punjabis have dhabas, right, on the roadsides. You get awesome food there. Where the truck drivers pull in, swearing and sweating, full of lust for real food, just like home. Hauling our overloaded lives at the extra mile, we are truckers of another kind, looking hopefully years away from Sialkot and Chandigarh for the taste of our mother's hand in the cooking. So we've arrived at this table, the Lahore runaway, the Sindhi refugee and his beautiful wife who pray to Krishna each day, keeper of her kitchen and her life, the Englishman too young to be flavored by the Raj, the girls with silky hair wearing the confident air of Bombay. This winter we have learnt to wear our past like summer clothes. Yes, a great day, a feast. We swoop on a whole family of dishes. The tadka dal is Auntie Hamida. The karai gosht is Khala Amina. The gajar halwa is Appa Rashida. The warm naan is you. My hand stops halfway to my mouth. The Sunday light is locked on all of us. The owner's smiling son, the cook at the hot kebabs, Kartar, Rohini, Robert, Aisha, Sangam, I, bound together by the bread we break, sharing out our continent. These are ways of remembering. Other days we may prefer Chinese. So this is the poem. So here we see how Imtiaz Dharkar compares her journey to the Lahore Karhai to that of the truck drivers back in India, driving their trucks on the Grand Trunk Road across Punjab to Amritsar, and then drenched in sweat, swearing, getting down at a dhaba with an expectation to get food that tastes like home. So she's also a trucker. Now she's a different kind of trucker. Instead of trucks, people like her, the NRIs or the non-resident Indians who are years away from their home in Sialkot or Chandigarh, that's what she says. Now they wear the weight of the rush and chaos in their lives for some extra miles. And then, in moments like these, they too stop at restaurants and places which promise them a feel of home. Now they have a hope of getting a break and giving a chance to the memories which reverberate in their heart to come to life and fill their environment with nostalgia. So this is what they go through. And with such a feeling does the poet enter the doors of the Lahore Kadai, expecting the taste of her mother's hand in the bread she's about to break. That's what she says. So we've arrived at this table at the Lahore runaway, the Sindhi refugee with his beautiful wife who prays each day to Krishna. So they want to taste their mother's hand in the cooking. So she describes the company that she has got around her on the lunch table. So who are they with her? Sindhi refugee with his beautiful wife who prays to Krishna each day. So it's this Sindhi migrant who has left his home back in Lahore, and he sits with his wife who prays to Krishna every day. Now Krishna is defined as the keeper of her kitchen and her life. There's an Englishman. The Englishman too young to be flavored by the Raj means there is an Englishman along with her in her company who is very young to be influenced by his domicile and instill that feeling of superiority. See, India was under the control of the British, right? But this Englishman who is in her company is too young. He cannot be influenced by his, he says, too young to be flavored by the Raj. Right? So he's too young to be influenced by his domicile and instill that feeling of superiority within him. And then two girls with silky hair wearing the confident air of Bombay. So she talks about two girls representing the typical Bombay culture with their confidence, the Mumbai today, right? So she further goes on to say that the winter has taught them to wear their past like summer clothes. This winter we have learned to wear our past like summer clothes, right? So, and they say, yes, a great day, we feast, we swoop on the whole family of dishes. So as they, kind of fall on the divine meal and a great day, memories from the past rejuvenate in the poet's mind. Every dish she tastes reminds her of someone back at home. So when she tastes the dal tadka reminds her of Auntie Hamida back at home. Every bite of the kadai gosht, kadai is the dish, kadai is that, we say chini chatti, right? It's a heavy bottom dish. Gosht is mutton. So kadai gosht brings to life memories of Khala Amina, another person from home. The gajar ka halwa that she has is, it synonymously reminds her of Appa Rashida. So all these people are relatives back at home. And when she has the food, she is reminded of all these people back at home, right? The warm naan, the bread is you. So the warm naan reminds her of a second person singular you, perhaps referring to her soulmate. You don't know, right? She's not very clear about that. There is an ambiguity seen here. So as she brings another bite near her mouth, her hand stops halfway to witness the divinity and nostalgia of that particular moment. She says, my hand stops halfway to my mouth, right? The Sunday light is locked on all of us. So the smiling face of the owner's son, the look of the cook of preparing the hot kebabs, the meat dish, and the fact that all the people on the table feasting together, Kartar, Rohini, Robert, Aisha, Sangam. See, Kartar and Rohini might be the husband and wife. Robert would be the Englishman. Aisha and Sangam would be the two girls from Mumbai, right? And they're sharing their past. They're bounded together by the bread they break, I bound together by the bread we break. So they are sharing their past. They are bound together by the bread they break. It's a nostalgic meal. And she wraps up, she wraps up the poem saying that activities like these, such traditional feasts, are, rather excuses for remembering their long forgotten past. So she says these are ways of remembering. On other days we may prefer Chinese. On a normal day, they would have preferred Chinese. But the tradition and nostalgia of such a feast encompasses within itself an unparalleled and a very important fact that it's beyond the food that people like her, truckers of a different kind, go for such a pilgrimage. It's not just food, it's something beyond the food. Right? The food is a very important metaphor here. It is the food that triggers the nostalgia and tradition, but it's something beyond that. Right? It brings in so many memories. So when we look at this particular poem, when we analyze this, we understand that this poem probes or goes deep into the question of cultural adaptation of the migrants. And what is the metaphor used here? The metaphor of the vehicle that is used here is food. So Imtiaz Dharkar has tried or has endeavored to centralize food as a cultural marker in exploring and interpreting the varied meanings that we share across continents. So here we see how she powerfully depicts that food is a medium to stay connected to home. Right? It also helps in bonding relationships in the present. So the poet identifies that she is not the only one who enjoys a meal at the Lahore Karhai, but the whole group at the table in the restaurant are bound together by the food they eat, and they share a common culinary legacy. Right? So they're all from different places, but they share something very common. So the power of connectedness is presented through the metaphor of food here. So when we look at the last lines of the poem, these are ways of remembering. Other days we may prefer Chinese. So the last lines of the poem are rather dubious, so there is some kind of ambiguity. Here we see the poet relishing on fond memories of the unique cuisine of Lahore, but suddenly she jumps to a widely variant Chinese dish or culinary in the final words. On other days, we may prefer Chinese. So this overriding nostalgic mood of the poem is reverted to the present realm. So the sentimental thoughts about the taste of home-cooked food are, I would say, juxtaposed with the immigrants' adaptation of the taste or adaptation to the taste and culinary habits of their new homeland. Right? So the old homeland brings in sentimental thoughts, and the host land, which has become the new homeland, has provided food to which they have already got adjusted to. So this is, and you can say it is an acculturation process, adapting to the culture of the new host land. And this has transformed the identity of the immigrant so positively that the transition to the new ambience is not something that is difficult. So there is no sense of conflict with the host society. And here we see the poet declares no resistance in the adoption of the host land. Right? So the foreign cultures which have existed in the host country are accepted very easily by her. So they very effortlessly move from one cultural ethos to another. The transition from one cultural milieu to the other is very easy. So here we see how Dharkar brilliantly merges nostalgia with assimilation. They get assimilated to this new culture. At the same time, there is nostalgia for the old culture, and there is a brilliant merging of nostalgia and assimilation. So the multiculturalism that we see here, which are faced by the immigrants, it's very beautifully pictured through the metaphor of food. And we understand how this particular poem at the Lahore Karhai explores the arena of food as the cultural marker of identity. Now, when we look through certain aspects of this poem, we have to analyze movement as a very central aspect. Now, movement begins with, the movement to the Lahore Karhai, the journey across London, described heretically as a pilgrimage. It's not a pilgrimage. So somebody would say it's heretical because how can you compare driving to a restaurant to have food to a pilgrimage? But here we see that the journey evokes uh, it evokes another journey, though it's indirect, a journey of another kind made by people the speaker is aware she cannot claim identity with, right? See how she talks about the truckers thunderings. She cannot claim identity with them. And another thing that we understand here is the diasporic journeys that have brought her to London, right? So at the level of form, the poem itself is on the move. Its rhythm, energy, especially in the beginning stanzas, it mimics the movement as it describes the packed car heading to the Lahore Kadai. It's a great Sunday when we pile into the car. So piling is packing into the car, right? Then another aspect that we analyze in this poem is the question of home and community. Now, the only set location in this poem is the restaurant. And this poem is a poem about family, about intimacy, but it also takes as its location not the family kitchen or the dining room, but a restaurant. So, though it participates in a familiar diasporic identification of cultural identity and food, it refuses to situate this within the bounded domestic space of the family. It's not the domestic space of the family that is seen here. We are in a restaurant. It's a space of larger friendship, right? And there is the owner's smiling son, the cook at the hot kebabs, right? And there everyone is drawn into the circle of the intimacy of food, bound together by the bread we break, right? And they're all not from Wembley. They're not in Wembley now. So they have driven to Wembley. They have come across the city, right? We also see hybridity. First in the language. In the first stanza, we see, no beer, we are Muslim, but the morning sun squeezed into juice and yaad na jaye. See, there's no translation of yaad na jaye into English, right? It brings into, we can say, into the reader's perspective, the theme of memory, connection that is central to this particular poem. And there is even the dishes, tadka dal, kadai ghost, gajar ka halwa, ghost, gajar ka halwa. They're not put in italics, so they're not put in inverted commas, right? So even the different kind of crowd, you have the Lahore runaway Sindhi refugee, then you have the Englishman, the girls with silky hair, right? So this is a hybridity, religious, national, intergenerational, but it's not just that, it's beyond that, right? And the poem does not give too much importance to the hybridity, and it also does not give too much importance to identity, right? So she says, the winter we have learned to wear our past like summer clothes, right? It's just like you cannot discard it, but at the same time, you cannot be too much a part of it. So we understand that there's no distillation of identity, but there is a particular moment where we are part of the homeland, right? That is why she says at the end, other days we may prefer Chinese. So it's not just, it's not just nostalgia, as I said earlier, it's also an assimilation. There is a distillation, not always, but. So the migrated, displaced people across the world, when we look at migrants or when we look at displaced people, as even when we learn postcard to Kashmir, we understand that such people usually turn to writing. They become writers because writing seems to be one way for survival. So they live in a very uncanny world as a foreigner. And sometimes it brings into them feelings of isolation, strangeness, etc. So they are at times very shocked by the different people, the different cultures, the surroundings. See, when they go to a new place for a first time, even when we go, we definitely would feel that, right? So they're very far from their motherland, from their relatives, from their people, but they take an effort to remember their roots in one way or the another. So sometimes it can be a very simple thing, or sometimes a general sight which would take them back to the past, right? Sometimes a mere sight of a thing brings the acquainted taste of a food that they would eat at home. So Imtiaz Dharkar is one of such writers who still keeps alive the very roots of our mother country in our heart. So the very sight of the cliched happenings ignites the flames of past memories in our heart, right? So, in this particular poem, she is reminded of the lives of the truck drivers in Punjab and Amritsar, who would be full of lust. So it would be kind of interlinked Pakistan to Lahore in Pakistan to Amritsar, Punjab in India. So driving across the states, they would be full of lust for the food that is prepared at a dhaba. Now, when they reach the dhaba, they would just relish the food and they would enjoy the food as they would do to their homemade food. So, Dharkar, when she sits at this restaurant in a London city, is constantly reminded of the truck drivers and the dhaba food they would relish either in Amritsar or Punjab. If you've not eaten dhaba food, I think you should try that one, especially the Punjabi dhabas. They've got really awesome food, right? And she sees a great similarity between these truck drivers and herself and all the other migrants. Now, what is the parallel that she draws between the migrants, the displaced people, and the truck drivers? See, she's trying to bring up the central picture or a very critical picture of the struggle that a migrant or a migrant deals with, or a person who migrates to another country deals with. It's not easy to kind of assimilate to a new culture. You need to go through a lot of pushing and pulling and jostling, right? Of accepting the new culture, maintaining your own culture, being accepted by people from another culture with different perceptions. It's not that easy. When you go and live in a foreign country, we always think it's easy. It's not easy. To kind of assimilate to that culture takes time. You cannot just assimilate and accept that culture and forget your own culture. You need to maintain your own culture. At the same time, you need to be accepted by people who are from a different culture. They have different perspectives, they have different perceptions. So the trials to be accepted, to be familiar with them, usually causes a sense of disillusionment in the minds of the migrant. Sometimes they're so confused and bewildered. And this person suffers and struggles through all this, and there is this a very, very heavy baggage of fears, expectations, desires, hopes, etc. Right? Now, we might not understand that as well because we've not gone through that. Right? But this is what a migrant usually suffers. And when we read this particular poem, we see how Imtiaz Dharkar is associating the visit to a restaurant with a pilgrimage. Now, what is a pilgrimage? A pilgrimage is a journey which one takes to connect with God or with his own inner self, right? Now, this is the way in which she wants to stay in touch with her roots, the culture, the ethnicity, the identity. So it is a kind of journey. It's a kind of pilgrimage, right? It's a kind of finding your inner self. So she maintains her cultural values on one side, because she is a Muslim and she says, no beer, we are Muslim. See, in Islam, liquor is prohibited. So she maintains that cultural value, right? And she misses the food that her mother would make for her. So all that is there, it is a kind of journey wherein you have assimilation as well as nostalgia blended together. So when we kind of conclude this poem, we can say that we can read this particular poem through a frame of intertangled relationship between food, culture, and identity. So there is nostalgia, there is homesickness, which torments the migrant speaker, right? And this cannot hold her back because she has found a sense of home in the food that she has at the restaurant. So she creates a space, as I was talking about, a third space for herself, in which questions of gender, religion, nationality no longer seem to matter, right? The culture she left can be remembered in a shared meal with friends if she feels in the mood for it. But if she does not, there are other possibilities. That's what she says, I can have Chinese. So the reading of this particular poem in a new trajectory of food politics would bring out new vistas in the understanding of the relation of food practices with culture and identity. As we all know, and we should realize that immigration is a really painful process of displacement as well as re-establishment. It's not easy. The process would actually require the person who has immigrated to rely on some kind of cultural artifacts as pieces of nostalgia that would soothe his or her mind when they feel so torn apart, especially when they have this longing towards their home country. And most often we realize that it is the food that the migrants count on to retrieve and hold tightly their culture and tradition in new social and cultural scenarios. Because, it's always, whenever we go to a new place, it's always the food that would bring us, that would connect us back to our homeland. That is why, people who are abroad, when they come, they say, oh, I would love to have some of the home food. They miss home cooked food, right? So food can be seen as a sign of communicating something. In addition to itself, it can act as a means of communicating with the past culture, with the lost culture, with nostalgic memories. And that is what we definitely see in this particular poem. So we can just conclude by saying that writing is the means by which migrants share the feelings and pain of their confused, isolated self. Right here, we see how Imtiaz Dharkar tries to collect the pieces of fragmented memories, and she tries to make a whole with her imaginative flair. Now, in one way or the other, she tries to associate with the homeland of the people, the people, the past, the familiar incidents to the present life, to scenarios, and she tries to feel connected and rooted. So she is trying to associate with her homeland, the people in the homeland, the familiar incidents in her homeland, and she's trying to bring that to her present life, to her present scenario, so that she can always remain connected and rooted. She has gone through the process of assimilating into the new culture, but she needs to feel connected with her past culture. So this is how she survives. This is how migrants survive. This is how they keep on moving with the altogether new world they create through this writing for themselves to comfort and bring some kind of peace to their fractured selves. So they all have problems. Migrants do have problems, but they try through writing to bring some kind of semblance, I would say, some kind of semblance of normalcy to their fractured selves. So they undergo a lot of torment because assimilation into a new culture is not that easy, as I've mentioned. But through writing, many of them try to bring into, I would say, normalcy, or bring some kind of normal hue to their fragmented, fractured life. So this is what this poem is all about. It talks about the metaphor of food, right? It's very interesting. It talks about the metaphor of food, and it depicts the immigrants' nostalgia for home, and it is, very, very notable because of the acute longing that Imtiaz Dharkar or any immigrant would have for his or her roots. So you cannot forget your cultural roots, you cannot forget your past, even though you move to a new place and even though you get assimilated to that new place. You cannot forget your culture, you cannot forget your past. It will always be part of you. Wherever you go, even when you all immigrate to some place, we don't know how many of you are going to go, but even when you go abroad or go to some other place, we will always carry a part of our culture with us. It has been internalized and we cannot lose it. And how much ever we assimilate to the new culture, the home culture will always be a part of us. So sometimes, we will find it very difficult to acclimatize to certain cultural norms of the new place that we are in. But being human beings who've got this tendency to adapt, we will definitely adapt ourselves to the new culture, and seemingly over the years, it will become part of us. Like she says, it will be like summer clothes, but then we can never forget, because there'll be some incident or the other which will always remind us of home, which will bring back memories of home. So this is what this poem is all about. Any questions?